In a world where war never ends, one man carries the weight of a generation, survivor of the battlefield, bringing you hard truths and hot lead, reviews from the locker, and trips to the meat grinder. Now he's taking you behind enemy lines, not into combat, into truth, stories from 1st Recon Battalion, with no BS conversations. Marine, veteran, Brad Iceman Colbert, where legends tell it like it is. This is not just a podcast, it's a mission.
And then how did you react to that? What did you do? What was your response?
He was also working at the VA at the time. So a lot of me getting into the system was through his help,
Okay.
which was great to have like a guide to get in there, and that like smoothed the way for me to get in. For me, like my way of avoiding my trauma, my preferred addiction was having an eating disorder. So while I was in active duty on these deployments, I was battling anorexia.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would go through cycles of it where I would just not eat. I would lower my calorie output to the lowest possible levels because it was something that I could control. And I was starting to do that again when I came back in 08.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob could see this was happening to me. So the first thing I did when I made it into the VA, at least the psychological component, was to see like a behavioral specialist so that I could start to not go on the starvation wagon. So that was the first time I was administered like an SSRI, an antidepressant.
Okay.
Went on that for about 6 months and then went right into immersive counseling, where the idea with that is you kind of choose the memories that are most troubling to you and just kind of slowly build the narrative around them that you've been forgetting.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat with a counselor through probably the first like 5 months of 2009. And I felt better, like just having, especially also talking to Bob about it, and kind of and I do kind of pick out some of the memories in the books,
Mm-hmm.
in the book that I kind of worked on, and just kind of crawling into that felt like I was going down the right track, and I was able to stop the progression of the eating disorder, and I've never gotten on it again. So that counseling and that work that I did worked, but it wasn't fixing everything.
It wasn't fixing any of the other invisible wounds, or do you think that there are, when you say it didn't fix everything,
No.
would you elaborate on that a bit?
Because I didn't know what I know now.
Yeah.
Which is I had PTSD, and you can't go through this experience and not come back with some amount of trauma unless you're a sociopath or you're missing parts of the brain or you have serious concussions and traumatic brain injuries, or you're carrying on board all of these different toxic materials that we were encountering on military bases in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
on the ship, in these burn pits that we talked about earlier, in all these different pollutants, dust that were accumulating. And in fact, all three of these things are operating together at literal, like atomic and cellular levels within your body that will kind of distort how difficult or how bad the PTSD is,
Mm-hmm.
because maybe the bigger problem is the concussion. And maybe the problem with your PTSD, the reason you're not remembering enough, and that's first and foremost when it comes to trauma, you have to have a narrative of what happened and as detailed as you possibly can.
Yeah.
But if you have no long-term memory because of concussions or, as we're going to get into, a lot of lead exposure, which degrades your neurons that store long-term memory, then you're not going to be able to make that story. And the story is what allows you to go through this grief process. And the grief process is whatever it is going to be. Like, you might be angry, you might be sad, you might be silent. It's whatever you need to feel that you couldn't while we were on these deployments. I mean, this is what I was, I'm going to use this like metaphor that I was talking to AJ about in December. But when you especially have responsibilities in the fight and you're seeing your friends die or get wounded, or Iraqis just caught in the crossfire, you have a mission that you've got to carry out. So sometimes what you do is you sabotage what would normally be the grief process. Like when my brother took his life, I shut down. I let my life completely fall apart because that's what I was supposed to do. Like I would sometimes go silent for days. Other times I would go in the woods and just scream and scream and scream. If I did that when we were in Iraq in 2004, I wouldn't be able to carry out the mission.
Yeah.
So you take these experiences and these feelings that you know you need to have and that are just growling at you, and you put them in a footlocker, just like in boot camp, and you lock that fucker up, and then you carry on. But then you're putting more and more things in the footlocker, and that is alive. It's you. It's part of your whole being, and it's just shaking, and it's wanting to break the lock. So you put fucking boot bands on top of it, and maybe riggers tape on top of it.
Yeah.
And the problem with the longer that you sabotage that process is that it's going to find a way to leak back into your life. Even if you choose an addiction, which, hey, the one I chose was an eating disorder on the basis of having my mom having an eating disorder and my grandfather and my great-grandfather. This is like something that's been in my family for probably ever. It's just the way we chose to deal or not deal with our troubles. It's not that different from alcohol, which is the preferred method in the Marine Corps because it's legal, and the Marine Corps doesn't have a problem frowning on that.
Yeah, it's socially acceptable, more so than LSD, mushrooms, marijuana, cocaine, or insert name of self-medicine here, over the counter.
Absolutely. But you can be a workaholic. That's another form.
Or an adrenaline junkie.
Or sex, or fill in the blank.
Yeah.
But the longer that you keep those things in the footlocker and don't let them out, they're going to have a more explosive way of blowing up in your life eventually because they have to be dealt with. Your subconscious, this like hidden part of the brain, is where you're storing all of that. And I'm huge into Freud. So cancel me, fire me, whatever you're going to do. I think he was wrong on many things, but I think he was right when he described the power of the unconscious, and that's where we're storing a lot of these traumas and troubles, along with like the body itself. But I was finally opening that footlocker when I got back, especially talking to Bob. So 2008, 2009, I'm opening it, I'm looking in there, and I feel like I'm starting to get better in my heart and my mind, but my body is continuing to fall apart. I've got the pain from falling through the roof.
Yeah.
And I had surgery on my right shoulder. I had a slap tear from that roof fall as well. But it's more that I'm also experiencing more allergies that I described earlier. And I've got a lot more fatigue going on. And as I said earlier, I typically have a photographic memory for place, and I start getting lost. And my friends are saying, you do not get lost, Alex. What the fuck is going on with you? So kind of fast forwarding again from '08 to 2010, I'm feeling well enough that I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back to graduate school. I'm going to get on this academic rodeo that maybe I thought was going to come back into my life, but now is like here.
Yeah.
And even though it's going to be weird because fucking nobody's a veteran at all for the most part in the program that I picked. And Portland, Oregon, of all places, I know I'm going to go through total culture shock going up there from my ex-Mormon life in Salt Lake City, Utah.
100%. So ideological, geographic differences, socioeconomic, there's a whole host.
For sure.
Yeah. And then you've been to war and you're going to immerse yourself amongst people who recently graduated high school in some cases.
That's right. So while I'm there, my brother and I get these similar symptoms where we're getting spots, we're getting like super fatigued. Sometimes we're sleeping like 15 hours a day and we wake up and we're exhausted. And that goes on for a couple weeks until I go and see my primary care physician at the VA at Portland at the main hospital up on the hill. They run some tests. Lo and behold, hey, you've got mononucleosis, the kissing disease.
Mono.
That we've all got.
Yeah.
And as a adult, well, just as a person, this stuff locks into your body and it just permanently becomes part of your DNA. And when you have a kind of stressful moment where your immune system is overwhelmed, it literally makes these zombie B cells that come out of bone, and then the virus is reactivated again. And it overwhelms the system, can mess up damn near everything, get inside of your skull to create a lot of waste because your brain is a supercomputer. So to protect it, it creates this thing called a cytokine storm where it just like launches all the nukes at the virus. But now you've got a brain full of dead material and dead bodies, and there's very little tubes and pipes that come out of your brain. And so that's contributing to part of the brain fog that I had. Well, the doc says, okay, all you need to do is go home and rest. And eventually your immune system will beat this thing down and you'll be A-okay. That went on for 2 years where I was
long rest.
And when you rest, you rust.
That's an interesting turn of phrase. I like it.
If you think about this super complex system that we're walking around with, and I was on the drive over here, I was thinking about how I find it funny how I grew up not liking AM talk radio. So maybe that's why I'm not deep into podcasts for the most part. But whenever I watch podcasts, I'm like, look at that. 2 cavemen, 2 cave women yelling into a microphone. We have not evolved that much, but we're surrounded in all of this modern new age stuff, right? That our bodies have not really adapted for, especially the pollutants that we're going to spend some time talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I went home, told my brother the same thing, and that wait ended up lasting a lot longer. And that was kind of the beginning of this whirlwind of self-diagnosis and medical odyssey that ended up lasting longer than my time in the service to figure out what was wrong, to get better, and then be able to get my life back.
It took a couple of years of you really sort of being in limbo before that journey started, though.
For sure.
But you didn't get any better. There was no improvement. In fact, there was probably quite the opposite. So at what point did this introspection turn into an investigation?
Well, as I'm sitting there rusting, and the side point that I was going to make there is that, so you have this trash compacting system. It's called the lymph system. And it kind of works through like direct vacuum pressure. So in order to move the waste through the lymph system, you have to move, right? And all of the gaps, or all the, I guess they would kind of be like channels, they all go towards your heart. So They go through your arms, they go down through your head, up through your legs, and then eventually that will go into your blood system and then go into your liver, which is your blood cleaner and your pollution cleaner, right? Well, by not moving and sleeping all that time, I was just probably building up more and more waste and feeling worse and worse and worse. But I still had enough of my brain and a lot of this training, right, from an undergrad time of being just like a deeply curious person. And if I'm not getting better, according to what the doc at the VA is saying, maybe there's something else going on. So I just start reading about mononucleosis. And reading about mononucleosis in this wonderful world of the internet, there's just tons of sick people because there's so much chronic illness now that's out here in the world. And through that, I started learning about food allergies. Oh, and my food allergies are getting worse. Well, while I'm recovering from that, I get another blow, and that is in March of 2011, my little brother takes his own life. And this, at that time, I'd already had several friends kill themselves, but this was probably like the biggest, IED blast I'd ever fucking gone through.
Yeah.
Thankfully, by then, I let the grief process just devour me. And it obviously, grief is stressful. So, and I'm not working during this time. So I have to move back in with my parents. I'm taking care of them because they're going through this as well. And it's like us versus the world because we have a lot of well-meaning people coming and wishing us well, but they don't really want to talk about it. Nobody really wants to talk about suicide in America. It's like this, I mean, we're still not willing to talk about sexual assault a lot, but we're much more willing to talk about sexual assault than we are suicide. It's just too dark. It's too ugly. I think for many people, it just reminds them that they've also wanted to take their own lives. And so basically my family and I were just in isolation throughout that entire year of 2011. Well, I start to feel a little bit better again, just a little bit. And now I'm like ready to go back up to Portland again. I go up again in 2012 and I'm still suffering from allergies. Eventually I'm at my food co-op in Portland. And I see this advertisement on their online page for a doctor that they recommend. And he's an integrated doctor of integrative medicine, which in Portland, Oregon at the time, it just sounded, everything in Portland sounded like bullshit. People sold these little salt rock lamps that would salt lamps. Yes. They would dispel negative energy.
It's fantastic.
And everybody's got gemstones and I'm super cynical about these things, but I also, just like to poke fun at people. But getting kind of desperate, I just book an appointment with Dr. H and I go in to see him and I look at his background, and his background was he was a fucking corpsman. Corpsman's not going to lie to a fucking Marine.
Right.
Especially outside of the service. Yeah. And I'm going to have that bond with him. And instead of just being your typical pre-med who only has so many biology classes, he had been a chemist before he became an MD. And so I'm like, okay, he's got a much different, maybe holistic view of the human body, and maybe that's going to help me out. So I go and see said doctor, who, by the way, is a quack. He's on a quack list, but I don't care. At the time, I'm desperate for a cure. I'm desperate for an answer about all this multi-symptom stuff of fatigue, of allergies. I'm starting to get headaches. I'm losing memory. Like I said, my usual go-to is I know places, people, and things, and I'm starting to lose some of that. And at the time, I'm only, I'm 32. Shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
So I go in to see him, and he makes a list of all the things that I'm eating, and then decides to do a whole bunch of food allergy tests, and it comes back Hey, I'm allergic to gluten. Okay. I'm allergic to dairy. I'm allergic to pineapple. I'm allergic to garlic. So we take all those things out, and I start to feel marginally a little bit better. Okay. This is a process of elimination for him. And the next thing he says is, this story sounds familiar to me. And he starts telling me a story about baseball. So I'm all ears because I'm a fucking baseball addict since I was a kid. And he had once worked in Florida before he came up to Oregon, and had been treating some single A, double A baseball players. And one of the coaches from the team came and talked to him. And he had these middle inning relievers who were just flamethrowers. They were throwing like mid and high 90s cheese. Well, halfway through the season, these guys couldn't throw the ball harder than like 40 miles an hour.
Wow.
So he's pleading with Doc H, can you tell me what's going on? Figure out what's wrong. Well, he talks to them, and again, process of elimination. He finds out what they're eating. Both of these ball players were eating tuna and marlin off the boat every day.
Yeah. Well, filled with mercury.
Filled with mercury.
Yeah.
So he tests them for mercury poisoning. And lo and behold, using blood lead levels. So that's how much mercury they were getting exposed to. Because typically when you measure heavy metals in your blood, unless you're around that thing in high amounts, it's not going to show up in your blood. Because these things have half-lives, and your body has the ability through the liver to detoxify some of this stuff, right? Well, with those fish, and fish are unlike us, they can do something that's called methylation, which means they can take mercury into their bodies and it doesn't oxidize and destroy their cells. For you and me as cavemen, and the cave women as well.
Very political. Correct. I love it.
Mercury, basically, it can catalyze and break the walls that are around a cell, and oxidize different processes like things that happen in your mitochondria, which make your powers. And they can also get in your chromosomes and start to mess up DNA transcriptions, which will mean that you're not replicating DNA, and unreplicated DNA becomes mutated, and mutations can become cancerous. So fish can suck it into their cells, and they can effectively kind of cement around it, and it doesn't mess up cell walls or cell functions within them. And that's why you can be a gigantic marlin and still be swimming 45 miles an hour and getting hooked by, big folks out in the, in the Gulf, and get reeled in, but still, be in top physical fitness. So he pulled them off the fish, and then he put them on these chelators that would pull out the mercury from their system to kind of speed it up. And within probably 3 months, by the end of the season, they were back to throwing the ball in the low to mid 90s. So he looked at me and said, I think you've got a more complicated story here from your service. And I suspect you have some kind of heavy metals poisoning. So we're going to test you for that. Okay. And I went on I write about this in the book, but I did what's called a challenge test. Nobody should do a challenge test. You're putting a whole bunch of this chelator in an IV bag and then flushing it into your system. The problem with that is you can move these cadmium atoms, lead atoms, mercury atoms, you can move them around your nervous system, and you might end up lodging more in your brain or in some part of your body where you don't want to.
Risky.
So with chelation, you want to go low and slow. But at the time, I didn't know any of that. And I also was just so desperate to have some kind of answer. So we fill me up with the IV. I go home and piss in a jug, bring it back. We send it to a lab. Bing, bing, bing. You've got lead. You've got mercury. You've got cadmium. You've got arsenic. You've got uranium. I hit the bingo card across
basically
the board.
Every single chemical that should not be ingested or absorbed.
For sure. And now that didn't tell me where I got these things or when I got them. But for me, that answered the question of like all of these different allergy problems migraine problems, memory problems since my service ended, or even during my service that I could remember. And that this was probably, his conclusion was, the reason I wasn't recovering quickly from my mononucleosis strike was the fact that these things were suppressing my immune system. And I was not able to have like a full-throated response to shut the virus down and clear out the rest of my system.
What was your reaction when the tests came back? Were you relieved, or did it scare you more?
My prayers had been answered. And I especially got obsessed with mercury. It was maybe it was wrong-headed. Now I see that in hindsight, but I was relieved. I like immediately told my mom and dad, "Oh, I have heavy metals poisoning. No wonder I'm so crazy. No wonder I'm not, responding from all these health troubles that I'm having." And from there, I had something that I could go and research instead of just kind of going on these health forums and then finding somebody who had mono and also this condition, and then finding somebody else. And you kind of go into these different rabbit holes.
It's a major rabbit hole.
For sure.
And it's unfortunately one of the things that the internet allows for.
But I was relieved. And I also had a doctor who understood that and took me seriously in terms of my symptoms and didn't gaslight me or blow me off. And he had treated people with heavy metals poisoning before.
And what was his TX or RX actually? How was he intending to treat you, or was he?
Well, before we went into treatment, he did something that really the whole book kind of lays out. I mean, Josh has a different name for it. It's historical anatomy. It's a very academic term because academics love their terms.
And I just quick digression there. And so when I read the book, again, this is a digression. One of the things I love about your book is just the concert that the two of you jointly create. It's his voice and it's your voice, and they're not competing. They're very much complementary. The narrative that it weaves is so engaging while informative. It is not bogged down in narrative, and it's not bogged down in academia. It is this beautiful symbiotic relationship between you and him. And it's what makes, in my opinion, your book so incredibly readable and stand alone from so many other narratives that are out there on either, the topic of medicine or the topic of veterans health or the topic of war. It didn't read like, this is a bro's experience of combat, because let's be honest, there's hundreds of those out there. And I'm sort of numb to them all.
Yeah.
Your book, the two of you collaborated on, and despite it being a collaboration, it doesn't detract at all. In fact, it adds. I love the way the book is written just simply because of that. And his term that you just said, it's great. He says that other people have used it before. I don't know about that. I can't prove it one way or the other, but I love it. And I latched onto it right away.
So, Doc H, you know how you typically go and you sit on the table that they have that they can bend into different positions, and they have the sheet of paper that they put over the top. He pulled me off that, and he started drawing some things on the sheet because he was a very visual person like me. And what he drew up was a kind of a list of things that you needed to figure out. Okay, so Alex, you've got to like go back through your Marine Corps experience, but this time maybe put the pause button on, PTSD and falling through the roof. I just want you to think about things that you encountered, like different products. What bases were you on? How much tuna fish did I eat? I ate a lot of tuna fish. How much fish did I eat? I ate a lot of fish with the Iraqis because I was living with the Iraqis. So I ate fish right out of the Tigris River every other day. And, oh, by the way, there were bodies of Iraqis in the river, and the bodies were filled with mercury because Iraq has a long and brutal history with mercury poisoning. And this is all stuff that would kind of be building over time. But that was the first time that I was instructed to kind of think more about my service in terms of like the ground that I was walking on and the products instead of just the people and the orders and the fighting and the dying and the training.
It's a very forensic way of looking at something, but it's not something that you and I are used to doing. When we talk about our experience in war, it's, oh, where did you serve? You know, what unit, what equipment did you have? What firefights were you in? Who do you know? Who did you lose? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
We're not ever asked to look through the lens of history quite this way.
No. And it's, so historical anatomy, just to give you a quick definition, think about what happens when you go and see a medical doctor and you're in the waiting room and they bring out a sheet or 10 sheets. You conduct medical history, right? What do you put in medical history?
No, if you ever suffered from high cholesterol, blood pressure, you know, it's all the biographical, but they don't ask anything other than that typically.
Right. Yeah. So for us, since this book is a mix between science, memoir, and history, but we only have a subject of one. So we can't literally take me out back, open a burn pit, roast my face in it, then go to the gun range, fire 10,000 rounds, and then put me in a truck and go blow me up in the woods to replicate all the things that I experienced. So we're depending on studies of other people across time.
Yep.
And we're making assumptions that are scientific, but very loose. So we're doing our best in an era and in a moment where we don't have complete data, but that doesn't mean we don't have any data at all. Yeah. So historical anatomy would be taking that same medical history and putting it on steroids. So, okay, date of birth. When were you born?
1974.
Okay, 1979. What was happening in the environment in the United States in the 1970s?
A lot of DDT.
Lead was legal in gasoline and paint.
Yeah.
So your date of birth isn't just the calendar year. Right. It's also what was on the environmental stage at that time.
Where in America were you born? Were you living in suburbia? Were you living in an apartment?
Right.
Were you living in the projects? Were you living in the country? Were you on city water? Were you on well water? Did you live next to a power plant, a nuclear power plant, a coal-fired plant?
Yep.
Et cetera.
Okay. Or if you're a smoker?
Yeah. Parents smoke. Yeah, exactly.
Do you smoke weed?
No.
Well, where was the cigarette? You know, what factory did it come out of? And what happens to the tobacco on the farm? Same with weed. Like, where was the weed farm? Did they use fish out of the sea that were filled with mercury to grow the plant that now that you've smoked and you've inhaled some of the mercury? That's what Dr. H was trying to teach me. And then Josh has kind of created and used from other historians to kind of lock my body into these chapters, is putting that whole process under a microscope and on steroids, pulling from all these different things: psychology, neuroscience, chemistry, physics, environmental history.
And I just don't think anybody's ever narrated something like that in such a way before. And
no.
If it wasn't so goddamn tragic, it would be an incredibly entertaining read. Your personal experiences, your historical thought, opinions and beliefs on what we did to that country, what got us into it, what failed to get us out of it, would have in and of itself been the basis for an amazing narrative. But it's layered on top of the human toll, one that's obviously intimately personable and unknowingly replicated. You're one individual who happened to have the cognizance to put all of this down on paper. You were lucky to pair up with Dr. H to be able to capture that information. But at the end of this story, which we're going to get to at some point, we're still left with the fact that there's probably an unknown number of people out there waiting to write that same story.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
But let's continue on yours. he outlines sort of this chronology that you need to fill in. He gives you this outline. How long did you spend filling in those blanks, identifying time and place?
I mean, that would take all the way up until publication of the book in last April, but it went quite quickly. I think it was within maybe 2 weeks that I had something to hold on to. And you got to remember, in the background, burn pits are a live wire subject throughout, like, especially after the drawdown from the surge in Afghanistan. Burn pits are like live wire, and it's become kind of the Agent Orange for our generation. And that there's no disputing that. But what you want to remember is if you get obsessed with burn pits, you're going to miss the rest of the burning forest for that one burning tree. Well, at the time, the VA has a project. It's called the Burn Pit Registry.
I know it. I registered for it.
Okay, excellent. So everybody should. And using that document that I got from Doc H, plus the fact that I kept journals the whole time that I was out there. So I knew where all the little fobs that we were at. It helped me kind of fill in the story even more. And then I submitted my stuff and just waited to see whatever would happen, because they have, in order to like bring legislation to bear, they were going to have folks submit materials so that they could do better research, and then maybe they could come up with a solution. So I added that into my list, and then making sure that I didn't get any more exposure to mercury. Well, I'm not eating fish at that time, but I do have mercury amalgams in my mouth.
Your fillings.
And having read a bunch of studies out of Denmark and Sweden and Norway, where they started banning fillings in the 1970s, Doc H looked at me and said, "You're probably going to have to get those removed." Now, if you talk to the American Dental Association about this, some doctors will say they're A-okay, they're just fine. If you talk to some chemist, they'll say, is mercury a solid? Is it a vapor? Is it a liquid? It depends.
It's the only liquid that is solid that's wet. It's nasty stuff.
It is.
Yeah.
So I took that and just assumed, okay, my teeth are part of the problem, and I'm going to spend what little I have left of all my savings from these deployments, to have them removed. So I dropped out of graduate school a second time. And 2012 is when I had met Josh Howe. Josh is an environmental history professor at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. And being the sneaky ex-platoon sergeant that I am, when I applied to graduate school, I wanted to make sure that I got as much housing as possible so that I didn't have to work while I was in school. Because school can be hard, especially when my mind wasn't like fully up for everything. Like I was going to need extra time. And I was going to also work on a second degree in applied sciences and restoration, environmental restoration, because that's my like trade. That's my day job. So in order to go through both schools, I read the VA manual and figured out, hey, I can do that. They'll cover my housing. So in the daytime, I would go over to Portland Community College and work on that. And then in the afternoons, I would come and see Josh. Well, I'm going to drop out again. Doc H tells me that and says it'll probably take anywhere from like 2 to 4 years. But since I feel like I have an azimuth now, okay, I have to remove heavy metals from the body. That means I need to make sure that I'm not getting exposed to anything ever again. So I'm going to remove it from all my foods. I'm going to remove it from my mouth. I'm not shooting as much during that time just because it's not my job anymore. And I don't have access to tons of ammunition. And also shooting alone is no fun. You want to go and do things with other people to make it entertaining or just challenging. So shooting is off that list. I'm not fly fishing with lead weight and putting it in my mouth. I also have my water checked when I moved back to Salt Lake City, and lo and behold, that's where the uranium is at.
Okay.
Because it's naturally occurring in granite rock. That's how we get a lot of radon gas in Utah. It's got that radioactive half-life, and it's percolating through the rock, which then gets into the water. So I put in a reverse osmosis system to pull that out, and then just would go and buy, huge gallon-sized things of spring water.
Yes.
And then again, went deeper into the bowels of the internet and just like independent medicine to find a bunch of books by again, some would call him a quack. His name's Andrew Cutler. And he had pioneered mercury detox in this country in the late 90s. Detoxification from like different chemicals has been around forever. I mean, we've used activated charcoal to cure people for thousands of years at this point. But pharmaceutical chelators, that's like a new thing that comes out of the 20th century, which is also incidentally when we're starting to use more heavy metals in all these different products at higher and higher rates. So there's 3 different chelators that he kind of focused on. And I took his manuals as like gospel. And the more I read on him, the more I realized, okay, this is going to probably take me like 2 or 3 years to remove the mercury from my brain. Because by then I'm thinking, all right, maybe some of these short and long-term memory problems based on all the cadaver studies that they've done of people who were mercury poisoned and also lead poisoned are causing all my mind troubles.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can remove these things using this chelation protocol, and by the way, the book is not about how to do that process.
Right.
The book is ultimately a diagnosis of the problem, because even though Josh is a doctor of history, I'm not, neither of us are actual practicing medical physicians. So we can't tell you to do that. That might get us in a lawsuit, right?
It could. But I think that if you read between the lines, you would understand that it is. It is both a diagnosis and a treatment.
Absolutely. And I think what's more important is for us, we are after the correct diagnosis of the problem. Mm-hmm. Why is it that we have all of these veterans coming back with crazy chronic illnesses? We have people who have no history of asthma who suddenly have asthma. We have people with no history of glioblastomas, which is a very particular kind of brain cancer that they don't have in their families, getting them. We also know from a RAND study, RAND is a think tank out of Santa Monica. It came out of the Second World War. They were funded by, I think, Douglas Aircraft Manufacturing, and their think tanks are what drive foreign policy in this country. We can go somewhere else with that later. But RAND had done their own study and found that there were, in 2008, like 350,000 veterans coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan who had concussions and TBIs. And the Congressional Budget Office, damn near around the same time, said 25% of all veterans across the MOSs were coming back with concussions. And then we have PTSD. And then we have burn pits firing up and all these toxins. Yeah. So for Josh and I, we're seeing once again that these things are operating like a stool. And you are sitting atop that as a veteran of global war on terror. And in order to treat you, you have to treat all 3. You can't do these things in isolation. If you do, you might not be able to actually fix that very one leg without working on the other one and the third one. Mm-hmm. And that's our diagnosis of the problem. Why do we have veterans coming back with these complex troubles and injuries that are really hard to treat? It's probably, in our hypothesis, because all 3 of those things have happened to the veteran. And maybe not from the things that you think, because not everybody got blown up.
That is true.
But how many car crashes were you in?
Yeah.
How many times did you get hit in the face during McMap training?
Right. Parachute landings.
How many doors have you blown off the hinges?
Right. Yeah.
that's a concussion blast. I mean, even shooting an AT-4 or throwing a frag, if you think about Newton's second law.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of
Right.
overpressure. There's a lot of things that, it doesn't have to be roadside bomb.
Yeah. And this part of your skull
Yes.
is
Yeah.
part of your brain, and
Yeah.
there's no helmet on your face.
Right.
So when you get a blast to your face, you're just like a fist to the face. You're adjusting some of the bones. And that may in turn be causing problems inside of your skull because maybe the waste isn't coming out and you're not getting enough nutrients or cerebral spinal fluid, or you've got a bad neck from Firewatch or wearing all this goddamn gear or sitting in the Amtrak for 3.5 fucking weeks, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of contributing factors. And there's a lot of, I don't want to say apathy because when you say apathy about the medical field, it somehow implies a lack of Hippocratic oath. And that is not what I'm trying to infer.
For sure.
But I do feel that institutionally there is apathy
Yes.
towards these issues. I very much like to hear your story, or at least your experience individually about you versus the Veterans Administration and their take on what you presented to them as evidence of an injury that they're culpable for. So how did they take what you brought to them and how they respond to that?
Well, I didn't put another application for disability in until 2015. It wasn't until long after I had met Dr. H and gotten the heavy metals diagnosis from him. And thankfully, I'd gone through a concussion and a TBI screener when I came back in 2008, and I was cleared for that.
Okay.
And by then at the VA, I had a history of seeking counseling, and they were seeing me for PTSD. So I had been approved for post-traumatic stress disorder disability. And eventually my feet. So with Bob Welsh's help, I did get 70% disability by that time. Eventually, with Doc H, and I started seeing a nurse practitioner who specialized in heavy metals detox just because I needed somebody to talk to. I think that's more what anybody needs in chronic illness than anything else, is just somebody who will believe what they're going through. Because once I came out with that diagnosis from Doc H, and I started going and seeing my boys and just talking to, guys in our little, groups, people thought I was nuts. People thought I was the Mad Hatter.
Why?
Mercury poisoning. Are you crazy? Are you making these things up? Oh, by the way, Alex is the one who had an eating disorder. So he had a crazy relationship with food. And nobody else was at that time, like nobody else in my battalion, let alone like 1st Marine Division, was talking about, I've got a diagnosis for heavy metals poisoning. And some of it might be from the very things that we were doing and living in.
You didn't know Eric Cucker, nor would you, but a friend.
Through friends of friends. Yep.
Eric had a period where he had a piece of shrapnel that they did not remove from him. And he went through heavy metals poisoning because of it that leached into his bloodstream.
All right.
So he, the reason why I ask you why is because everybody thought the same thing about him, because unrelated to that, he had a lot of other things that were lambastic and wow, over the top behavior wise. And so nobody took it seriously. So it's ridiculous how holistically we can ignore something like this. But the nurse practitioner listened and helped.
For sure. This is not like in the book, because if I started listing all the supplements and all the different treatments that I did, it would turn into a Reddit post, and it would kind of, And we would, again, for the focus of the book, as I was saying earlier, we want to focus on the correct diagnosis of the problem. And when Josh approached me on doing this, we were both like, we're going to write an airport read. It better be under 300 pages. This is not an academic book.
And it doesn't read like one. But you do quietly, without being conscious of it, it's all in there.
Absolutely.
It could easily be a textbook, if not for your narrative that's woven through it, which is, again, why I love it so much.
So if I started including the miniature details of detox and all the supplements I was taking, that would just get us out of that 300-page range.
Right.
So eventually, as I'm slowly getting better over those years and I'm understanding more about burn pits, I have all these different doctors, from Doc H to the nurse practitioner to my dentist, write a bunch of letters to the VA saying, okay, Alex had heavy metals poisoning, and so let's approve him for another stint of disability. Mm-hmm. I saw an environmental medical doctor at the VA when I submitted this paperwork, and he went through the stuff, and it was the first time I heard somebody mention, wow, this is a lot like Gulf War syndrome from somebody at the VA. But he looked at the data and he's like, well, it clearly shows that you did have some heavy metals poisoning, but herein lies the problem with trying to prove these things.
Yeah.
Whether it's in the life of a veteran or the life of any civilian here in the US of A or anybody on planet Earth, is atoms of toxins, whether they're natural, like mercury or lead, or things that we create, like things we're going to talk about, plastics and forever chemicals. They don't have a stamp date on them that says, I was created and I went into your body on 1st of January, 1986.
Or where. The mechanism of absorption, all that stuff.
So trying to prove these things is insanely difficult. And for the VA, this is all pre-PACT Act, which we're going to talk about, I'm sure, at the end. Before the PACT Act, you had to have monumental proof that the exact thing at the exact place, and you got a test at that time, could definitively prove you were exposed to it.
Yeah.
So even with all the evidence that I had jacketed together for that disability form, the VA came back and rejected it.
Which is insane.
It was, but it also wasn't surprising.
No, hardly surprising, because they are a victim of their own, rules, their flow chart, their differential diagnosis, treatment tables, all of it. I get it. I can see why it happens, but it doesn't mean it's no less of an injustice.
Well, I didn't take it so personally at that moment. I didn't even think I was going to get it.
Okay.
But I was just happy to be getting better in this whirlwind of chelation that I was doing. And as I marched back towards health, and your health is your wealth, like that saying it means exactly what it means. I was able to mount the horse one more time and go to graduate school for a third time. And this time I actually finished it. So in 2017, I start the process up again. I go back to Portland. I finish both of my degrees. And eventually that's when Josh sits me down in the fall of 2018 and says, we've got to write this book together. And I'm like, I know I've got to write this book together, because by then I'm convinced I'm not an aberration. Everybody from our generation, or anybody of any, whatever generational cohort you were, if you were downrange during that time, you were getting exposed to something. And maybe you didn't have the outcomes that I did based on your MOS or where you were at.
Or just a fluke, just 100 different coincidences that.
For sure.
Yeah.
And maybe what I was starting to accept was that I got lucky, that I got sick before anybody else, because as time has gone on, I keep getting better in my life and other friends are getting worse in more complex ways, where it's not just, I only have PTSD, but suddenly I'm having migraines. And now I'm using Botox to treat the migraines, but they're not getting any better.
You're right in saying that it's probably transgenerational, but is it worse or better for those that served in Iraq or Afghanistan or Somalia or Nigeria there's plenty of places to choose from. I want to specifically get you to talk about why Iraq may or may not have been the worst place to wage war for you.
Well, what I'm going to do is make sure that I don't, forget about the Iraqis or the Afghans or anybody who lives there, because many of these pollutants we're going to talk about, they're just native to being there. So a lot of Iraqis have warbody experiences. I think what makes Iraq so wicked is how many wars have been fought in Iraq.
Okay, we as a student of history.
Well, like where do we want to go? So, Afghanistan is referred to as graveyard of empires, right?
Yeah.
So is Iraq. Iraq was the empire of the Assyrians, the Babylonians, Alexander the Great. The Romans. Then for a long time, it was the Ottoman Turks. World War I, the British invade. And then the British make Iraq a colony. Mm-hmm. Then the Iraqis finally get their sovereignty, but under Saddam Hussein, who thinks of himself sometimes as like an emperor, sometimes as a socialist, sometimes, he was a novelist. He was a creative lunatic, is what he was. He invaded his neighbor, Iran, and they fought an 8-year, just absolutely bloody war. And I have inside baseball on this because when I was an advisor to the Iraqis, a lot of my senior Arifs, like senior sergeants, they would tell me bedtime tales of fucking fighting the Iran war. And I was like, this sounds like shit out of the First World War. Like waves of killing people, chemical weapons that they were firing. And the United States was funding both sides. The Israelis were funding the Iranian side. And they had small tech weaponry, like human bodies strapped with explosives, children running at Iraqi gunpoints, all the way up to tanks and huge missiles. So they're blowing up all of these tanks, and these tanks are made of all kinds of goodies. Fuels,
a blat of armor, all kinds of
depleted uranium. Yeah. And that material is being blown up into little and smaller components that are mixing with all of the dust that is in Iraq. Mm-hmm. Then we have the Kuwait War that another generation went through. Short and violent, but the amount of destruction that was done in Kuwait, especially to the Iraqi army, took more of that material and blew it up into the atmosphere and settled down in the dust. And pieces of heavy metal that break down into smaller components, they're going to cling to pieces of dirt. Well, Iraq is a dusty place.
Oh, yeah.
It has been, and it's also been the cradle of civilization for a long time. Mm-hmm. You think way back to Mesopotamia, and that's probably where all these religions that we practice here, like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they all came out of Iraq through like Zoroastrianism, this like really old religion. And they built pyramids there. They're called ziggurats, and many of us got to go and check them out. Yeah. Well, it's been a great place to grow between the two rivers, but it's also in the desert. And so there's always these crazy Shamal winds that come hot and heavy that blow through and rip up a lot of that soil and send it airborne. Well, that's mixing with all these wars that are going on. And oh, by the way, all those tanks and trucks and vehicles that are driving throughout Iraq, they're running on leaded gasoline. Iraq has been using and burning leaded gasoline since its invention all the way to 2021. We banned leaded gasoline in this country. Like, it took all the way up until the 70s that we saw the medical evidence for why it was like hurting people, it's destroying their minds, destroying their guts. Yeah. So we eventually banned it, and That was in 1990. The Clean Air Act kind of officially got rid of it. There's still a little bit in like small piston-driven airplanes in the United States, but we've pulled it out of paint, plumbing, and vehicles. Iraq, was still being burned that whole time. So it's going up with all of these damaged machines in the atmosphere and also mixing with that dust that's natural. Well, you've got climate change. And as Iraq is sitting like right in that place right along the equator, it's called the Tropic of Cancer. If you look like on a globe, that area of the earth during climate change is getting drier and hotter. And Iraq is also using more and more water and getting less from Syria. So that means more dust.
Yeah.
So more dust clinging to more lead, clinging to more mercury atoms. And then we throw in these massive burn pits. Like the occupation, I wasn't in Afghanistan, so I can only depend on what accounts that you guys have comparatively about just how much bigger the footprint was of the United States military in Iraq versus Afghanistan. It's, from all accounts I've heard, it was much, much bigger and much bigger burn pits. So when you mix in all of that together, it makes it just an exceedingly likely place that you're going to have lung problems. And everybody we know was coughing on something or sneezing up something, you know? So that's not to like discount any of these other places where we've been fighting, but Iraq just has like certain historical events that maybe make it a lot worse. I mean, I can throw another one right in there if we want to talk a little bit about mercury. In 1971, there was the Great Iraq Grain Disaster.
Okay.
And this is something that I learned about from Dr. H, because he had done some reading and he'd lived through the 70s. So in 69 and 70, Iraq had pretty big famines, and they had to start importing a lot of wheat to, you know, make up for the lack of food. So the United States and Canada shipped tons and tons of grain over there. Well, to make sure that it makes the safe passage and isn't going to be rotting under all these different bacteria and funguses that want to attack grains, they covered it in mercury.
That's genius.
And they didn't have quite the technology that we would have, like sealing packs and maybe better vacuum protection. They did what they could in a hurry, and that was the best option that they could come up with. So it safely makes the journey. It isn't rotting. Mm-hmm. They plant it, harvest it in 71. Thousands of people are dying. There are loaves of bread that are pink. Again, this is also just stuff that my senior Iraqis would be telling me. So the Ba'ath Party ended up telling everybody to stop eating the grain. They burned it or they threw it in the rivers. If you're going to burn the grain, it's going to circulate all of that mercury back into all of this dust, into all of the soil. And in the water, it's going to go through the cycle of life. Mm-hmm. It's going to go through all those carp, silver carp, grass carp. These are these big, beautiful fish that are there that I would be eating
years later.
40 years down the road. And fish can accumulate these things like we were talking about earlier, and it doesn't affect them. So I think every country on planet Earth has its own like wicked environmental history. Mm-hmm. And maybe Iraq's is just a lot more open and bigger and badder because it's been the scene of so many wars in the last couple of decades.
It has, and it's not stable in many ways, like a lot of the places that may have seen war are. So, yeah.
So maybe that answers your question.
It absolutely does. Okay. I think that, like you said, you just got lucky. You spent an inordinate amount of time being at the epicenter of conflict for the planet at a period in history where we were ignorant enough to dump the worst things imaginable and technological enough to say it's not our problem.
Yeah.
Or maybe immoral enough, a little bit of both. So the Veterans Administration has done a much better job. You know, we talked about this earlier today about identifying and treating wounds, physical and invisible. But this is still very new to the body of medicine. And you, more than anyone, know this firsthand. Do you think that research like what you have provided, narratives that you have provided, is going to result in any change? Do you think that this adoption of a post-military analysis and detox is ever going to manifest itself?
Yes. And I think we have to include the civilian, because VA healthcare is influenced by civilian life and civilian decisions, whether we like it or not.
Okay.
Everyone who's watching this video right now who has not served in the military and has never been to a VA hospital has been impacted for the better by VA healthcare, because 60% of all our nurses, doctors, radio techs, PTs, they go and get training there. And the wonderful thing about working with veterans is you get to work with a stable population who can be poked and prodded and don't bitch as much as most civilians would when they need to teach young people how to diagnose and treat. The VA also was the first healthcare system in this country to use digital record keeping in open source coding, which was like Vista coding in the late 1970s. So we have better medical records than the civilian sector. We've also invented nicotine patches, the hepatitis, I think, B vaccine. We've done a lot of work on MRIs. What the VA does and does well, and I laughed at it when I first heard the name, integrated medicine. But integrated medicine really does say, we're not going to silo things and treat PTSD over here at one doctor and brain trauma over here at another clinic and toxicants over at this one. We're going to work you together in the system, because often they have panels that are assigned to veterans. And those panels will sit down and say, okay, you're going to take psychology, but this psychologist needs to talk to the toxicologist, and the toxicologist needs to talk to the concussion person. The way that private medicine is set up right now is specialization and division of labor, whether we like that or not. Things have to be in network. That's what they call it, according to Medicare and Medicaid and Obamacare, right? I also say that not just because of the structure, but I had an ear infection last month, and I went and saw my primary care physician 2 weeks ago, got some antibiotics to clear it up, and she said, this book has changed the way that she's treating veterans. That, for me, is like the target that I'm trying to hit.
Yeah.
And with veterans, this is like the most important part of my argument to that. We are special needs. If you send us into the civilian world, this goes back to the very point you were making at the very beginning. It's such an alienating experience. So even if you do feel like, okay, I've got maybe a top-notch healthcare program here at a university or whatever healthcare system you have, it's still going to feel like an alienating experience because you're not around other veterans, and you can't treat veterans in isolation. Like, I have gone through this thing on my lonesome because maybe I was the first one down the gauntlet to sort it out. But a lot of the best like care that I've gotten through the VA, and even like my own platoon and my own battalion, is communal. And I think the VA can do that, but it's got to fucking be funded. And for the last 12 years, the VA has been chronically underfunded and has been cut by both political parties. If we get deep into the text of the bills, which I'm very old and I'm old fashioned. So when I study politics, I fucking don't pay attention to speeches. I read the bills. Then I go check the votes, and then I follow the fucking money. And literally, I told you earlier, but I'll do a quick VA history, not in its entirety, but Undersecretary Kaiser, he was appointed by Bill Clinton in the 1990s. Secretary Kaiser said, I want all veterans to be covered by VA healthcare, which is as it should be, I think. The Congress at the time balked on that, so they didn't get the funding, and Clinton didn't fight them. Next thing we have, as I told you before, in 2003, the Bush administration said under this presidential memorandum that you had to have 20% disability in order to get covered. Well, we should just assume that everybody's going to have some disability and get them into the system instead of making them go through these hoops, which are very difficult to navigate. Then you fast forward to 2014. For our purposes, that's like one of the most important moments in understanding why VA healthcare has failed to fucking address chronic illness and chronic problems coming out of these wars on terror. That year, Bernie Sanders, an independent socialist from Vermont, you may have heard of him, he came into the Congress, and he's been a heavy hitter for veterans. You can say what you like about him. You can disagree with his politics. That's fine. But one thing that you can't dispute is he has gone to bat for veterans for a long fucking time. In the 1990s, when a lot of doctors and Congress members were dismissing Gulf War syndrome, he was there batting for those guys, saying something else is happening here and we need to figure it out. Well, he presented his own findings and found that the VA was being shortchanged by like $26 billion.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. You do a lot with that.
But considering how much we have spent on these wars, often unaccounted for, treating veterans has to be included in part of any, I think, war that we start. We just have to assume that there's going to be war bodies, because the environments we're fighting in now are not just, caves and
they're not
forests.
antiseptic.
No, they're filled with all these different products that we've been creating. And especially if we're fighting insurgencies in civilian villages and towns and cities, a lot of that material, even with our best judgment and attempts to minimize damage, is going to create some kind of blowback for the veterans themselves. So I think they should be allocating that when they declare wars. At any rate, I'm giving this homework, and I got a book that I can recommend that you guys can read so that you can not take me simply at my own word, because I want you to do your research on these things. But Sanders went to the Congress and said, okay, we need to fund that. And everybody balked at the price tag. Eventually, there was a piece of legislation that came out that year because there was a scandal at a VA in Arizona.
I remember that.
VA Shinseki, right?
I remember that.
And he had to fall on his sword. This is under the Obama administration. Well, there were backups, there were wait times, and the piece of legislation was called the Choice Act. And what it would do is let you have the choice to go out to any doctor in town and get the treatment there.
Yes.
So it seemed like a good idea, instead of pouring more money into hiring more people at the VA and building up the VA system.
Then you're encouraging the silos that you were just referring to.
And so therein lies the problem, is that a lot of arguments for privatizing the VA are coming from people who are being funded by healthcare insurance companies who want to grab the veterans out of the system because they can milk them and use them. Maybe there are also some well-meaning people here, because I don't want to be totally cynical. And the VA has fucked things up. I'm not going to sit here and not say that. Look at me, right? But I still want to believe in the system and work with the system because I have seen it do good things. Well, the Choice Act was signed. Choice Act said, we're going to let veterans make their own choices. There was a congressional study 2 years later in 2016, and the program was supposed to last 3 years and then sunset. They reviewed the program and found that it did not improve the health care of veterans. It did not reduce the cost for the taxpayer or the veterans. And it inevitably caused more cuts at the VA because it created this crazy panel where the president gets to choose 3 people, the House gets to choose 3 people, the Congress gets to choose 3 people, and the VA gets to choose 3. And they meet this unelected board of folks, and they decide how much is going to be cut from the VA instead of keeping it, I think, in a more public setting. And again, those cuts went forward. Then we had another round of privatization called the Mission Act in 2018. So Choice Act was signed by Barack Obama, Democrat. Mission Act was signed by Donald Trump, Republican. So it's been both parties. The finger pointing needs to, stop. That continued that process. And so each president since Trump, Biden, Trump again, has allowed the VA in that unelected panel of bureaucrats to just decide willy-nilly who's going to get pulled, what departments will get cut.
Right.
Again, I think the problem is within like the greater scene of civilian healthcare is we're just facing a crisis of the cost of care and also diagnosing all these super complex problems and fitting it within this gargantuan health insurance company system, plus all these private practices. And I still believe that the VA is the better way to do that. And the PACT Act proves that. The PACT Act is effectively the Burn Pits Legislation Act. It's probably the greatest piece of VA healthcare, since maybe the Montgomery GI Bill that came out of the Second World War.
Yeah.
Because the PACT Act assumes, I don't have it completely memorized, but it's got a list of, look up these symptoms. Okay.
Yeah, I remember going to the link, filling out the burn pit questionnaire, and there was a couple different websites, and it was part of my out processing from active duty, assignment sheet that I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So
what it does is it covers radiation poisoning, burn pits. It also backlogs all of these terrible cases of Agent Orange, which we used on the Vietnamese and our own people during the Vietnam War. And veterans are assumed to have 23 different diseases as presumptive conditions. So if you have melanomas, neck cancers, pancreatic cancer, I'm not going to read them all. You can go and look at the VA. Chronic sinusitis, lung diseases. If you have any of these and you're experiencing any of them, the VA says, because of that, you will be covered by the PACT Act. Now, yes, you need to give us your medical history, but it's assuming that even if you were in Iraq for one day and you're around one burn pit and you end up getting the symptoms of any of these presumptive conditions, you're covered under it.
Yeah, it eliminates the burden of proof on behalf of the veteran. And that goes a long way towards fast tracking help.
For sure.
Treatment.
And to kind of parlay that with other environmental contamination out here as civilians, if you look at what's happened to the people in Flint, Michigan, where their water was tainted with lead, they're not getting any kind of presumptive care.
Or the 9/11, the towers when they were
absolutely not.
All those second responders.
We had a bunch of railroad cars under the Biden administration. This is in a place called East Palestine, Ohio. They fucking blew them up.
Yeah, I remember.
And now the entire town, apparently everybody is getting cancer.
Yeah.
Well, because of the ability of the federal government to kind of do things that private companies can't, there are things that the VA can do, even in its large bureaucratic machinations. I think ultimately, though, this is one of the reasons, again, back to the focus of the book, because I encounter this a lot. We go and do presentations, or I talk to people and they're like, well, why didn't you talk about how to fix the VA? And I'm like, I think it's a great question, but that's another 300 pages. And the discussion we need to have is this one here is we need to have a much larger adult conversation about it because most of what I encounter is just either it's all bad or it's all good, don't touch it. And I think this is happening at a time we have to remember there's so few of us. Less than 1% of Americans, 1 to 2.
Serve in the military, yeah.
Exactly.
It's the lowest it's ever been per capita in the history of our society.
So this also explains why so much of this VA healthcare system, which was built up after the Second World War in massive amounts, because there were so many of those guys, is now a lot of, in an era where we are deeply in debt for a variety of different reasons. I think one of the biggest is the Pentagon and these military misadventures we've been going on. But there's also domestic funding and overspending, right? In this period of like tight margins and what can we do about the deficit, if we don't service that big of a veteran population, then why do we need to have so many people? And why do we need to keep so many hospitals open? It's a legit question, but in making those cuts, people are forgetting like how widespread veterans are across the country, and that maybe we need to expand our vision of exactly what we want the VA to do. And that's something that I have yet to see come out of any real, I don't see this in any of the politicians of any political party. And I don't see it amongst a lot of veterans. There are some like disabled American veterans, but so far, nobody's like stepped into the breach to say, okay, what should VA healthcare be for the 21st century?
Yes.
Who's going to get covered? I mean, we're kind of spitballing here now, but one thing that I was thinking about on the plane ride over here was I would like to cover all veterans with 1 day in the service because of the complexity of injuries. But I also look at veteran families who lived on these bases, and got exposed to many of these things.
You can't drink the water at certain military installations.
Absolutely,
you can't. They provide bottled water, or they have massive filtration. Right up at the point of service. And what about? Remember all the lawsuits about Camp Lejeune, and if you lived or served at Camp Lejeune between these years, you're eligible for this class action lawsuits. And
Camp Pendleton is about to be a class action lawsuit, by the way. It's coming very, I think, soon, the next 2 years.
I think their awareness is higher than it has ever been.
For sure.
But being aware doesn't equate to treatment, to prevention, to compensation.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing I would say about expanding VA coverage to veteran families is not this continual belief in treating veterans alone. I sometimes think about like how much counseling my parents need from my own experiences in dealing with me. I think about my buddy Randy Revert. He must have missed like 6 birthdays of his daughters. Like even now that he's been home, he's estranged in some way, shape, or form from them. Why shouldn't they get some counseling? Maybe they need to go work with horses. I think the other thing too is we should be autopsying, totally voluntary, as many veterans as possible, because that's the definitive way to figure out a lot of this stuff that we talk about. A lot of the scientific studies that we rely upon, they come out of autopsies, especially for head trauma. But also toxicants, because that's the thing is you open somebody up, you can see exactly where it's at. And I think this would bring like great relief to some of the families, especially ODs and suicides, so that they would understand that maybe their son or daughter didn't hate life so much as they had much more going on inside of their heart and mind than they really understood at the time. And that would take some ease off of them, because being a family that survived a suicide, whether it's veteran or not, it's such an isolating experience. Like people don't want to treat you like a pariah, but it just kind of naturally happens because they're just too weirded out to be like, oh, how's that whole suicide thing going for you? No, I mean, I would like it if somebody came up and said that to me, because I'd say what was on my fucking mind. But
yeah, it's
too
very,
hard.
it's raw. Nobody, that level of empathy is rare. Nobody wants to immerse themselves in that. I mean, it's painful and it doesn't feel good. And people naturally have an aversion to immersing themselves in a pain. So I absolutely can see why somebody doesn't want to do that. But at the same time, you're kind of making it worse. And I feel like that's, again, it circles back to a previous comment. I think that's why veterans and a lot of times bond together after the service, because there's nothing quite like it. And that camaraderie and that fellowship and really and truly just somebody who understands, we don't have to have a long discussion about it. We both did the same shit. I know what you're talking about. I know how you feel. That is a level of empathy you don't get anywhere else.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't profess to have all the answers as far as fixing VA healthcare, but I think if there's anybody who can do it, it's the VA, because ultimately it has a history of integration, which means it's going to treat the mind and the body as one.
Well, that's encouraging. And I'm glad to hear somebody say a different take on it, because a lot of times the VA tends to be a punching bag. I personally have never had any negative experiences with military medicine. I have been with the Air Force, Army, and of course, Navy medicine, all at some point in my career. And I never had an issue. Tangential exposure to the Veterans Administration healthcare, admittedly so. So I can't really weigh heavily on that. But all that to say, I am not one of the jump on the bandwagon, denigrate military medicine. But I will say this, I feel, feelings only, when it comes to mental health, they are a little slower to pivot than the private sector, only because of the lack of bureaucracy that the private sector is bound by. But I am refreshed to hear you say what you did. And I never really thought about it that way when it comes to more of a holistic view of the body and the mind, all, in a sort of a panel context. That's encouraging. I think that's great in that respect.
Yeah.
When you talk about some of the symptoms that you experienced, the heavy metal toxicity and some of the other exposures, I think that is, people's eyes glaze over. They don't really, if you said, "Oh, I got shot in the shoulder, and I broke a leg," but what you're talking about, I mean, it's hard to land. What do you tell people, or what story do you impart to help sort of personalize or ground that?
What I've been doing recently is turning the clock back. And we do that a lot in the book. So as much as I said at the outset, and we say at the very beginning of the book, like, this is a narrow book for a narrow audience. Mm-hmm. It's for the global war on terror veteran and their family. I'm a sniper, aim small, miss small. But being a sniper, I also want to inflict the maximum amount of psychological damage on the whole battlefield if I have to take a shot. So in point of fact, and I said this last year, not as a throwaway line, I meant it, but I kind of kept it tongue in cheek, but I said everybody is a warbody. Everybody has concussions, everybody has trauma, and everybody has toxic exposure. It's just, I probably had, and we probably have, more extreme levels of that than what you would experience as a civilian. Mm-hmm. But I also like to kind of push away from using my own examples of myself, even though I've written a book like this, because sometimes it just makes people think, well, I'm an aberration. It only happened to Alex because he's a special case. Right?
Or it only happens to somebody who has been in the military, or somebody who's been in the military and seen combat, or somebody who's been in the military, seen combat, but only in Iraq. And I get it. But you admitted it. It transcends uniformed service personnel. I mean, we are in a society where the word, 5 years ago, if somebody said microplastics, I wouldn't have had a clue what they were talking about. Now I am learning that we ingest about a credit card's worth of plastic every year.
Right.
I've recently, and I talked to you about this earlier, been looking at filtration systems above what I've already got. And I am on a well. Like I shouldn't have to worry about that type of thing in modern America, in a first world society, as rich of a country as we are. But you know firsthand that's just the reality that we live in.
Yeah. When I was driving down through the countryside today, I was actually thinking about Sherman's March to the Sea. Do you remember that from high school or grade school?
I remember it.
Okay. So once upon a time, William Tecumseh Sherman, he's one of the commanding generals of the Union Army, and he's ordered to effectively burn sections of Georgia to the ground on the way to Savannah as a way to kind of break the back of, I can't remember which general was fighting down here that he was headed off against. But if we had been right here where we're sitting, or maybe close by, the air would have been filled with bloody plumes of fire. Now, most of that would have been maybe forests, maybe crops.
Yeah.
But think about what was in those homes in the 1860s.
Yeah.
Leaded.
Pewter. There was a lot of things that we wouldn't want to put into our mouths now.
Mercury.
Yeah.
Thermometers were made with mercury. There were different tools that had mercury in them.
Yeah. A lot
leaded
of lead.
Glass.
Yep, leaded glass. I don't know about the paint.
I'm not sure about that either.
Yeah. But pigments, I know there was certain chemicals that they used, arsenic for pigmentation and some other things. Yeah.
So a lot of that would have been lifted airborne and spread throughout the entirety of Georgia, and then
sink down into the water table. Yeah.
Into the water table and into the drinking system, or into people's lungs.
Yeah. And then you change their DNA, and then they have children.
And then they were blowing up all the railroads. They called them Sherman neckties. They would just blow them up, and the rails would be like 10 feet high, and they'd be twisted up like that. Think about the amount of gunpowder and lead primer used to do all that, plus all the shells that they were firing. It's a similar experience, even though it's maybe on a lesser scale than fast forward to the First World War. Well, I like to bring items so that we don't get so spun up on like my words. Like that's very left brain thinking, right? Part to whole, language, numbers. Sometimes like to understand history, you need to like put your hands on it and feel it.
Visceral. I like it.
But this helmet. This is a Brody helmet. Yeah. So this is from the 91st Division. And one of the old doughboys would have worn that in the trenches. Again, we've got, they called it shell shock, was the type of concussions and PTSD they were getting. But shell shock was just a form of warbody, because you would have been wearing this while you're in a bunker, much like this, but you were getting, I mean, what's the longest that you've been under indirect fire?
Indirect?
Yeah.
I don't know, 30 minutes, maybe more.
Okay. So some of these guys would have been in a trench for like 5 to 10 days.
Yeah.
And while they're sitting in that trench wearing that helmet, their brain is bouncing all over the inside. A lot of coup. And then you've got to think about how big the shells are, how many are being fired. That's a lot of lead that's now circulating in the air throughout the entirety of Europe. And now, like you can, there's sections, and Josh writes about this in one of his chapters, where they still cannot farm in parts of the old Western Front in Europe because there's so much heavy metals in the soil.
Well, there's places at Camp Pendleton you can't walk through for that same reason. But a much greater during. So it's
always been here. It was with our grandfathers. It probably explains why they had such trouble readjusting when they came back in the 20s and the 30s.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be the same for guys who fought in World War II, where there was goddamn dengue fever and beriberi and malaria like you couldn't believe in the Pacific. So what were they using? DDT. But DDT is a carcinogen.
And a pretty good one too. Yeah.
So there really isn't anything new under the sun. It's just maybe finally we have such good environmental data and we're so much more aware of these things that we're beginning to like see it not only in like other veterans of past wars, but also in like our everyday lives as people.
Yeah. And you talked a lot about that in the book, you know, folks who grew up downstream from manufacturing facilities that used a lot of these chemicals in the end products or as waste or as runoff.
Yep.
I think we are going to be paying for the sins of our fathers for generations to come. War or no war.
Yeah. I mean, this is yet another thing that we don't dig into in the book, but we could spend some time talking about it, is if we want to prevent like illnesses and injuries like the ones that I went through, what are the mechanisms that we can build before people come into the service? Mm-hmm. And then what can we do while they're in? And then the VA is going to be on the way out.
Right.
I think, as I mentioned in like my chapter, people bring their own toxins to the yellow footprints.
Yeah.
Like when we do this little, you know, build your own Warbody adventure on you, we'll kind of do that. But maybe we need to start taking, you know, blood levels, hair samples, biopsies of people when they join the service, or when the recruiters go and talk to them, be like, you know, did you grow up in a house with lead paint? Mm-hmm. You know, like, for instance, we're in Georgia, and I was thinking about Dalton, Georgia, which is up in the Northwest.
I know where it is.
Okay. Yeah. Headquarters of Carpet USA, right?
Yep. And they used a chemical to make the carpet stain proof.
Forever Chemicals.
Yeah.
That's PFAS.
That's right.
And now we're learning how carcinogenic this shit is, and it's everywhere in the environment.
It is. Yeah.
And people who worked in the carpet industry up there have all been getting sick, but it's not just people in the industry. People outside of town, even miles outside of town in farm country, are getting it in their cows, in their produce, and then eating the cows and the produce. Yeah,
I mean, there was rodenticides that were used in California for a long time, and they banned them because not because they weren't effective, they were.
Right.
But predators would eat the dead or the the mice that had this toxic chemical in them, and then that in turn would get eaten by something else, and so on. It just contaminated the food chain. But it is, as you say, at least more in the public eye, which hopefully lends itself towards prevention and then treatment. I would love to see a recruit at MEPS baselined down to that level, and then mid-service baseline, and then on their way out as well. So part of your annual physical could include something like that. Yeah. And then, you would at least, if nothing else, on the way out, be able to definitively say, well, you were this way when you started and you're this way now, so we're responsible for it. But, also to be able to mitigate it. There's a lot of ranges, and it's been a while since you've been on a range in the military, but the way that we run the ranges is different now.
Yeah.
They're very vigilant about hand washing, clothes washing, and they tell you when you go home, whatever you shot at the range goes directly into this place, and don't do that. And keep your hand. And it's just different. I mean, it's different. It's not the way I grew up. It's not the way I was in boot camp or 20 years of service, but it is now. So I think that's a positive. At least that's one step in the right direction.
Yeah, and I feel like. If I was commandant for the day, one of the things that I would have to have the capability of saying to any Marine or sailor or family is, you're not going to get sick from drinking the water or living on this base. You may get hurt in training. You may get killed if we send you downrange. But the idea that somebody would get chronically ill from their service, I think that's fucking unacceptable. Even with all the complications that we've discussed today, and like how hard this stuff is and how much there is and how much of it is old and we're paying for the sins of our fathers situation, I still think no matter what, that's just wholly unsad. It's just crazy or irresponsible to me. Like,
I think it is, but I mean, honestly, Alex, how many times in America's history can we cite moral failings like that? I mean, there's a lot. Flint, Michigan is just one example in a long string of examples where the society has failed. I personally feel that this is one demographic that we owe more to, but that is not to say that the veteran is at a higher echelon of society than anyone else.
Sure.
But I I do think that those of us, and there's not many, 1%, some cases less, if you have the willingness to sacrifice for the greater good, I think that the greater good owes you a return on that investment, I think.
For sure.
And so while your book, again, it transcends the service member. I mean, it truly is. I think identifying everybody as war bodies, I don't think hyperbolic. But I think that the percentage of susceptibility is greater in the veteran. And I think that that body of work that you have written, that book, I think it should be read in a lot more circles. I'd like to see that by a lot of the policymakers and the decision makers.
So would I. I mean, I'm telling you what, if you don't clean up these military bases, if you don't start like taking care of this generation that we believe fits into this hypothesis, like you and me, recruiting is going to even get fucking harder for all the branches, because somebody's going to watch this podcast who's 18 and maybe they were thinking about going in, but this may have just maybe not intentionally, just pushed them away from making that decision. And we want good people.
We do. And this generation is the smartest generation we've ever had.
For sure.
They're tech savvy. They're in tune.
Yeah.
They're much more media friendly. They're much more politically and socially aware. They're not going to take the tough guy attitude that you and I did in a lot of cases like this.
Yeah.
So if you had 5 minutes of unedited time in front of Congress on this subject or any subject, what would you tell them? What do you want them to know?
I mean, the cost of war is forever. When you sign people up for this job, you're guaranteeing that you're going to have to take care of them in some shape, way, or form. And I think that's part of the commitment that we've had.
So you break it, you buy it.
For sure. And this is a commitment I think we've had all the way back to the revolution. We haven't lived up to it all the time. Okay. But you've seen various iterations, like under Lincoln, when they passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, GI Bill of 1944, where the commitment was real. You also just have to include this stuff in your foreign policy. Like, we live in a world of the environment. We always have and we always will. But we also live in a world where we've created and inherited environmental disasters and pollutants and poisons and things that we banned, but we're still living with. And this has to somehow translate into the foreign policy itself, which means the generals have got to be, I don't want to say green. I think that just sounds like greenwashing, but they've got to be a hell of a lot more self-aware that, wow, Iraq has a history of dust and leaded gasoline. So we're going to have to take some different precautions and think a little bit wiser about what we do when we put our troops in. I mean, burn pits, again, has been like everyone's favorite obsession because they clearly are toxic.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's something you can see and you can grab. Can't really see a burn pit inside of me.
Right.
These other things are going to require a lot more thought and self-awareness. And that's going to require a bigger sea change as far as the way we conduct foreign policy. And unfortunately, our foreign policy for, God, certainly our lifetimes, maybe going back further, has been one of less and less suits and more uniforms. We don't really have a policy of restraint. We're depending more and more on the military to figure out what we're doing out here in the world. And the consequences of that are falling on people, on us, including those in these countries that we, break, occupy,
Who didn't have a
invade.
say. Yeah.
And the consequences of that, as far as this environmental subject goes, is more costly to them and us.
It's a very interesting angle. And honestly, I don't think I've codified it in that way before. You talk about the second and third order effects of war. That is a fourth and fifth effect that I am not putting on my radar. So it's interesting that you bring that up. I'm really going to have to think about that with a bit more fidelity. Yeah. It's a heavy subject, and it hits home, especially, for you who have lived it firsthand. But I'm really glad that you did, because I truly hope that it results at least in a change, hopefully a sea change. For those
so do I, but let me, I was going to preface the whole discussion today with this, but I'll throw it here close to the end. I wish I was wrong. I wish this whole hypothesis that we've come up with of, this three-legged stool of TBI, concussions, PTSD, intoxicants, I wish it was wrong, and that I would be considered a quack. Nobody would read this. I'd be laughed off the internet.
I know, and I know why you say it too.
Every month since we've published this, another study comes out and confirms one of our arguments. Yeah. Or I have another friend, die. Or, this latest friend who OD'd, he tried to kill himself by OD a decade ago. So I don't doubt that it was another suicide. And because of this knowledge that I have, I can't go back. And I've talked to some of my friends about this. Maybe I know too much for my own good, but I'm never going to let that, let me stop believing these things. And I look at my friend and he just screams Warbody. Mm-hmm. He's had all those things. He played a lot of football in high school, and his coach said you could take a hit. Yeah. He was around all the same burn pits. He did 4 deployments with the same battalion. He went through a lot. And so for me, I just put his name on this book, and I see the exact same goddamn story.
And I think that you're right. It would be great if we could put the genie back in the bottle, but we can't. No. I think there's a lot of other exacerbating things. And there's probably a shitload of people out there that are in need of that same realization. And where do they go? What can they do? Individuals, people who read your book, identify with the signs and symptoms. Where can they go? What can they do?
So once again, I got to preface this by saying,
love it.
I am not a doctor, but I played one in real life. I mean, this is effectively what I had to do in large parts of my life to figure out how to get the treatment that I needed. And again, lately people have been asking me, okay, I have all this knowledge that you've given me, Alex and Josh, what do I do now? You got to build a narrative. That's ultimately what all trauma is about anyway. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that I want to keep hammering home. TBI and concussions and intoxicants, that seems a lot more straightforward. We need the brain to heal, and we know it has natural abilities to do that. And we have to remove the toxins from the body. Trauma is kind of like this ghostly thing that we're dealing with. Where's it going? How do I chase it? What do I do? You've got to go wherever your feelings are going to take you. And that might be to dark places. It might be to light places. It's wherever your feelings and memories need to go. Mm-hmm. And I like the saying that goes, the truth will set you free, but first it's going to hurt like hell and maybe nearly kill you in the process. That, I think, is a lot of what PTSD healing means. It's not being free of suffering from these memories. It's simply having access to them and letting them do whatever they need to do. Mm-hmm. I will always be in pain over my brother's suicide or any of my friends' suicide, but I don't hide from that pain at all anymore. When the tide comes in, basically chain myself to the beach and let it drown me because I know it's not going to kill me. It's going to do good things for me. And that's kind of really what happens with animals. Like I saw a bunch of dead possums on the road today as I was driving down
there.
There
are many. Yep.
And I was thinking about how a possum, right, when it gets attacked, it goes into like freeze mode.
Yeah.
And then it collapses. And then when it wakes up after it's survived, it shakes off the experience and it's able to function and go back to its life. It's not traumatized, right? We get stuck in a loop when it comes to trauma, whether it's stuff that we saw in combat. And again, trauma is trauma. Like it could be sexual assault. This is what we're going to talk about in a little bit. It could be things that happened to you in your childhood, but you get stuck in this loop of either not remembering all of it or thinking it's still going on.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part of sorting that out versus these other two things that seem a little more straightforward. So, as far as like, okay, what do I do next? I've kind of created this thinking, okay, first do no harm. What can I do that's free that will help me work on my disability, work on whatever I need help with my doctor, for my family or my friends or for myself. So I would first just start with your symptoms and write down whatever they are.
Okay.
And you can do this in total privacy and just let whatever come. I'm going to leave this with you, but write down everything, every ache, every pain, things that seem weird to you, even if they might seem embarrassing to somebody else. And then move towards kind of dividing your life into that day that you stepped on the yellow footprints or went to MEPS versus your pre-life. And we're going to start in the military experience because that's the easiest. So we'll look at boot camp, then we'll look at your MOS, and we'll go in time through these different things. So I'm just going to write down a couple of things.
Sure.
The parts that you feel comfy giving me.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. When did you go to boot camp?
I went in November of 95.
Okay. So, and you went to
MCRD.
Okay. Right. Why did I ask you that question? Because lo and behold, if you go and look at the Environmental Protection Agency's record.
Yeah. MCRD used to be quite a dump.
Absolutely.
Before they concreted it over.
Well, and I don't have this memorized yet, but the Environmental Protection Agency, it came out with a law in 1980 called CERCLA. And I have to know this stuff because my day job is I do conservation work. So I go out and clean up polluted rivers and streams. So I have to know a lot about environmental law and policy. Well, CERCLA is the Comprehensive Environmental Response and Compensation Liability Act. And that created what we call Superfund sites, if you're familiar with that.
Yep.
Superfund site is something so toxic in America that you generally don't want human beings near it because they will get instantly sick. And it has to be cleaned up sooner rather than later because it's going to affect the people, the economy, everything around it. And if they can't find the original person who polluted it, the federal government is going to step in and clean that up.
Yeah.
Well, lo and behold, many of these military bases, just like other facilities and forests and old mining towns and waste dumps in America, are on Superfund list sites. And MCRD is not, but if you had gone to Paris Island, it was put on that list in 1994 and was cleaned up. And the way I kind of look at this whole, mark my Warbody and follow me through place and time is to just assume if you were on that base that you got the worst of the contaminants. Just go with this. This is not legally binding. It's not going to go into the medical record. This is just going to help you like root yourself in, where do I go next?
In your investigation.
Because we're not going to go to testing yet.
Right.
First, you want to figure out where I was and what I might got exposed to, which might help you in the testing. So it's more kind of a process of deducting things. So, okay, you went to MCRD San Diego.
Yep.
So you weren't in a Superfund site. 1195. Okay. they're not using lead in gasoline anymore, but you are at that airport where there's planes landing all the time and blowing all that exhaust in your face. Okay, what MOS were you?
0311 and then 0321.
Okay. So that's going to help us when we talk about exposures, head injuries, trauma. And then when did you get out of the service again?
October of 16. October 16, yeah.
Okay. Now, the next thing that I would do is go through your military history and just go marking every military base that you were on in time. Because once again, a lot of these military bases, I looked at this, I don't know anything about El Toro that was closed in 99.
Oh, yeah.
It was
know where it is.
Insanely polluted place in Southern California.
I've been there. I wasn't stationed there, but I have walked the ground and done some observational operations there.
So you went straight up to Pendleton, right?
Nope. No, I went to Okinawa.
Okay. Which camp were you on?
Schwab.
Guys, Schwab on the list. Futenma and Kadena are, well, here's the thing. If you're in Japan, you're not in the United States.
Right.
So the Environmental Protection Agency
apply.
doesn't apply.
Yeah.
But a lot of these pollutants that were declared dirty on stateside American bases were still being used there. So from what I found doing a little digging, and this stuff is on the internet, like and on government sites, Iwakuni, Futenma, Kadena, all of these have asbestos and forever chemicals.
Yep. Yeah,
So
I remember.
I'm just going to assume, right? So you go down here to intoxicants and you're going to say, okay, PFAS, asbestos on Camp Schwab.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pendleton.
Yep. Pendleton.
Parts of Pendleton are a Superfund site since 1994. And this would have been, I think, 2019, there were several wells that were insanely contaminated with forever chemicals. Forever chemicals are these amazing, like better chemistry with living things that we have.
Yeah,
right?
I've been reading a lot about them, both before and during your book read. So yeah, they're all in the news lately.
Well, they're amazing. What makes them forever chemicals is that you have all of these, you have like long chains of carbon atoms that lock together, like 8 of them. And then they have this fluorine bit that's added to them. And that makes them take a long time forever to break down. That could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, it could be 500 years. It just depends on the environment. But they are really resistant to like heavy UV light, heat, water, solvents. And even in your gut, they do not break down. In fact, they sometimes get taken back up in your gut and they're very hard to excrete. Like right now, we don't have like a chelator that you can take orally or through an injection that will remove forever chemicals from your body. They're just very hard to get rid of.
You just try to avoid them in the first place.
Well, that's the thing about forever chemicals for like our service is we were flying on all these different vehicles. We're on all these ships. If there's a fire on a ship,
They use aqueous film forming foam.
And that is made of?
I know it's
PFAS.
Yeah, I know it.
Because
they
once again,
just banned it.
8 chains of carbon.
Yeah.
If you throw that on a fire, it's going to suffocate the oxygen and
Right.
put out the fire, right? Great. But what do you do with that material?
Yeah.
It stays, you
Forever.
sweep it off the ship or it stays on the ship. In the case of Camp Pendleton, a lot of this stuff ended up in the Santa Margarita River, which is the main source for drinking water in Camp Pendleton. I was reading about this recently because there's a class action lawsuit that's building, and it seems like Forever Chemicals is going to be a huge part of that.
I have been in the Margarita River, crossed it, swam it. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So we can kind of, okay, so that's, let's say there'll be more for you to fill out as you go out on that. But the next thing is to go through all of your ships, because a lot of these ships had lead paint, asbestos, forever chemicals. So mark down all your ships.
There are a few. I've got 2 years at sea total.
Then
Lots
you can do all your forward deployments.
Okay.
And this is kind of what helps for the burn pit registry, is when you say, I was in Iraq. And these are things, when you do this, you can sometimes reach out to your buddies and be like, man, I don't remember every teeny tiny fob that we went on.
Yeah.
But there might be some fool who does, like me, right? Mark down every base you were on. Even if you were in an area for 24 hours, this is the thing about burn pits, and this is kind of the strength of the PACT Act, is you don't know what was burning in that pit that particular day that you were there. And there were times during the surge where I saw people throwing LCD screens and mini refrigerators into burn pits. So if I was there that particular day that was happening, well, is that happening every single day? Who knows? You'd have to be completely monitoring it. So that will kind of help you build more of this, and then we can move on to kind of the big three. So when I talk about trauma, I think when we talk about wartime trauma, we either get obsessed with, or we only narrowly focus on like the lives and deaths of our own friends, and just have the most expansive idea about it as far as like what affected you.
Sure.
Not what anybody else thinks or what their experiences were. Did you have any friends die in car crashes on Camp Pendleton with DUIs?
No.
For instance?
No.
Do you know anybody who was sexually assaulted while they were in the Marine Corps or the Navy?
Nope.
Those are the kinds of things that I would add outside of I was in combat.
Right.
I lost friends.
And it's not just losing friends. I mean, it's also witnessing to there's moral injuries, not just physical ones.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of reasons that somebody could suffer from trauma or experience trauma. It's not, I watched my buddy die. Well, yeah, but you also watched 7 civilians get run over by a tank. I mean, I know there's no emotional attachment to them, but damn, that's traumatic. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then moving on to TBI and concussion, obviously IEDs are going to be the preferred route of that. 60% of our injuries in Iraq and Afghanistan were IEDs. But think of other things like McMap. Like maybe you took an extra hard hit in martial arts training.
For me, it was a couple of hard parachute landings.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
That's something I don't know anything about, right?
It's not fun. I don't have a lot of static line jumps, but 60, 70 of them.
Okay.
And they're miserable.
Okay.
Miserable.
Okay.
Nobody likes that because you don't land on your feet, you crash into the ground. Like that's legitimately the way they teach you to land. You crash into the ground. It's called a parachute landing fall. Feet, knees, butt, shoulder. And then when that shoulder hits, inevitably your head goes boink.
How much whiplash do you think you got in all that jumping?
Oh, more from free fall than from static line. But yeah, I mean, you're traveling at, terminal velocity, and then you arrest your velocity to, 20. So you're going from like 145 miles an hour to, yeah.
So that, like when I think of a head injury, I think sometimes people just think of like the brain inside of the skull. But think about the 3 parts of your brain that have evolved over time, your spine, like the fishy reptilian one you have. So from your tailbone all the way up.
Yeah.
Then you have this little part called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. Josh calls it the axis of evil in the book.
Yes.
That's the next brain that evolved. Then you have the cortex, but then you have the skull and the face. One thing I was thinking while I had that urine infection this month, I was like, man, how many times have you had swimmer's ear?
A lot. As a diver, I've had it quite a bit. Yeah.
All right. And all of that, recompression, decompression that you guys go through, how is that interacting with any other head injuries that you have? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely curious if maybe there's something worse that's happening amongst people who, are in boat companies or in recon and are swimmers, So put that stuff down. I mean, you rode motorcycles? You still do?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Any crashes there?
No. Well, yeah, that's not true.
Okay.
One. I had one.
All right.
I had a pretty good one once. Young.
Did you get evaluated for a TBI?
No.
Okay.
No. I
See?
was like 17. I think I just walked home.
Yeah. This is kind of jumping forward, but that might be the TBI that is worse than the one that you picked up during your service.
Yeah.
That's the thing to keep in mind as you're making this. And then we can kind of jump to the toxicants. Again, if you're just like, wow, there's a million things it could be. Find these base inventory reports where they've listed what's a Superfund site and what was on there. Camp Lejeune, we know they had trichloroethylene, all these brake cleaners, forever chemicals. If you're, again, go back to your MOS, okay, you're shooting a lot of lead. I'm going to put lead down. Burn pits, mercury, cadmium, lead. Oh, Iraq, dust, lead. That's just building that alone will kind of help you maybe feel, and seeing it like on paper in a map. I think it's also similar to that experience I had with Dr. H, is you're putting these things to paper and maybe they're not just spiraling around in your mind, right? The next phase that I would do is do the exact same thing, but now go to your pre-marine life, to your birth, and just go through, where did you grow up? What was there? What kind of home were you in? Did it have lead paint? Did you have lead pipes that may have connected to it? And then again, I think this is what's so interesting. I'm finding a lot about a lot of my friends as far as post-traumatic stress disorder goes. Some of the best people that I recruited in the sniper platoon, they already had a little bit of PTSD before they came into the Marine Corps. They were already extra vigilant, they're extra watchful, because they grew up in a home where there was a lot of violence, sexual, physical, emotional. And especially the corpsmen that I worked with, I saw them do such amazing godlike things. Especially, I have a friend, Doc Newton. He, some of the toughest things that he's done have been these angel flights. And angel flights, for those of you who don't know, that's when we fly at night and we can safely do it because you don't want to fly during the day unless there's a real emergency, because it's easier to shoot a bird down. So an angel flight is when you're going to pick up the body of a dead Marine or a dead sailor. And sometimes there's nothing in that bag but a foot or an arm. I've always been blown away when he tells me about those experiences. But then he'll tell me about his childhood and my eyes bug out.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, that's why you were such a good corpsman. You were already so used to all of this stress and hardship that when this stuff got thrown at you, you were able to handle it like a champ. So that's something to keep in mind. And it's something that I think the VA is starting to realize, that it has to treat PTSD way back. Because if you just treat the wartime PTSD, that might not be the worst of it.
Yeah. There could be pre-existing conditions. Absolutely.
So
this has been helpful.
Okay.
I like it.
Okay.
I think it's a good tool to help self-assess. Yeah.
And what you would do after you're finished this is then you can start going to see your doctor, VA, private, whatever you're working with, and start saying, I want to be tested for forever chemicals. I want to get tested for heavy metals. Everybody should have, I don't care what MOS you're in, everybody should be getting a TBI and concussion screening. And I'm an extensive one. The second one I went through with, that I wrote in the book about, was about 5 hours long. And it was a relief to do it. But this is kind of like everybody's going to have to take their own kind of steps, as I said before, because each one of us has maybe different exposure routes and different concussions and different types of trauma. But if you've got some kind of narrative to work on that you can hold on paper, I think it's going to make the next steps a lot easier.
In the book, you talk a little bit about how military protocols often exacerbate a lot of these vectors. Can you explain a little bit more about the combinations and how they are a lot of times worse than the individuals in unpredictable ways?
Sure. Well, think about the research that we have on pesticides, like off the over-the-counter spray that you use.
Yeah.
Those tests, when they either use them on animals, mice, rats, primates, or humans, they're only using that spray. They're not spraying that and also gassing the room with lead, or spraying it on, gassing the room with lead, and adding forever chemicals. Or you see where I'm going? These things are always studied in isolation. Sometimes because of like legal matters, sometimes because how much longer and more extensive that research is going to be. But when we're downrange, we don't have the luxury of using those products in the ways sometimes that they have been
The sterile conditions that they tested them in. Yeah.
So, for instance, in Iraq 2003, we were taking drugs to counteract malaria.
Yes, doxycycline.
Doxycycline.
Yeah.
And often that antibiotic can give you a sunburn. You can feel it while you're using it.
You're supposed to stay out of the sun.
In addition to that, there was another drug, it's called Maleficon.
Yes, I know it well.
And according to some of the literature, it can cause PTSD symptoms, like psychiatric symptoms.
Great dreams on doxycycline.
Nobody knows what the effects are of using those two products together. So now we're using them. And then we're putting up, there's so many different bugs that can give you all these terrible diseases and, transfer all these different bacteria to your bloodstream. So we're using off spray and pest strips in the tent. Then we're taking PB pills, which we're using to combat anthrax if we get hit by it. And one of the things to keep in mind with all that is when you're using all these different components, if you look at this brain that I brought, my plastic
it's a beautiful
one,
brain, by the way.
I don't have a way of like showing you what the blood-brain barrier looks like.
Yeah.
So I just wrapped the parts of the brain that are covered by it in saran wrap. So this part of the brain we talked about earlier, that is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. It doesn't have a blood-brain barrier cover on it, right? So just put that to the side for a minute. Many of these sprays that we're using and toxins, sometimes they can expand little holes and start to rip the barrier. Now, this is not what it looks like.
Sure.
What it looks like under a microscope is it looks like these weird X's that are kind of pulling themselves towards each other. And the brain doesn't want any water or water-soluble things. It can allow fat-soluble objects within. And that way it can protect the supercomputer from getting anything that goes in there. Now, as we talk about in the book, lead in your body, it can't really tell what is a lead atom versus a calcium atom. And so you need calcium to do all these different metabolic processes. So your body will pull in lead thinking it's calcium and it will go floating around the system. Now, your liver is going to detox some of that and shoot it into your kidneys and maybe some out of your intestines. But you're still going to get some in the overwhelming amounts because the liver hasn't adapted to deal with that much lead, as we've described how much there was in Iraq.
Yeah.
And in my MOS, right? It's going to float around, go through different parts of the system, maybe bury in bone where you need calcium. And then some of it is going to get transferred into the skull, into the brain. So if you have different off sprays, PB, which we know are thinning and weakening the blood-brain barrier. Some viruses do that as well. That's going to increase the chances for the brain to uptake more heavy metals. So effectively, it raises the chances for more damage to the brain. More damage to the brain means that dealing with a concussion and PTSD is going to be more difficult.
Yes.
Maybe it's going to make the effects of the head hits or the experiences far, far worse. So this is the other problem with a lot of like our research on these things is when we're in a war, we don't have the luxury of saying, well, we have this product. We know it can only be used in these circumstances. We just have to use it because if we get bitten by bugs and everybody in the platoon has malaria, we're not going to be able to do our job.
Right.
So this kind of gets us back to the questions we were asking about, okay, what can we do in the Marine Corps, if not the entire military? We have to have better drugs. We have to, maybe what we need are more herbal treatments that we know are non-toxic.
Yeah.
Maybe we need better materials that we're wearing.
Maybe it's an engineering problem. Yeah. I mean, I think it's multifaceted. I think it's a pharmacological problem. It is a societal problem. It is a training-ism.
Yep.
It's there's an engineering or a material solution in some of these. I mean, I spent my first 3 years in the Marine Corps in the jungles of Okinawa. You don't go out on patrol if you do not have a mosquito net. You don't. That is a material solution to an environmental problem. We did not spray the shit out of ourselves with permethrin. We just didn't do it.
In 2003 or just when you were in Okinawa?
In Okinawa.
Okay.
Later campaigns,
yeah,
we did. I went to Malaysia. I went to a couple of other tropical climate countries. We sprayed. We took doxycycline because nobody wants to get malaria. Nobody wants to get a mosquito-borne illness that could be worse than malaria. But I mean, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, I guess is the point. Yeah.
I think that, kind of as we say, like in the business, like two is one. You want to have multiple solutions. Yeah. It just might be, I think when I look at my experience in the military and now like my experience doing conservation, we operate under what's called the precautionary principle in environmental conservation. And that means like if we know a material, like 1 ounce of it is going to be bad for the people or the animals, then we're most likely not going to use it. And so we try to do the least worst thing first.
I like it.
I think the attitude that we have was just, we have these very powerful gels and sprays and solutions and pills and powders and smoke. So why not put them to use? Well, maybe we should have, or maybe we should be thinking about different protocol where we introduce something that, if you think about levels of lethal force.
Yeah,
right?
It's an escalation of force. It's
exactly.
the same.
Maybe that's a better way of counteracting these things instead of bringing out the nuclear weapons. Because when you bring out some kind of nuclear weapon to deal with malaria, there's going to be side effects. All of these different things have side effects. And that's just something maybe that the main thing that the book is really getting you to do is to have self-awareness of the past and now your present so that we can make a better future.
Well, let's take that same approach then. I would love to know what are 3 things that you think the Marine Corps, and let's just leave it with our service, could do differently to reduce exposure to some of these chemicals that we've talked about? Or let's broaden the aperture. Any of the modalities that we've talked about. Toxicants, concussion, PTSD.
I mean, I think we were discussing it earlier. If we have pre-screening for all the recruits coming in, that will help us manage them when they're Marines and then manage them on the way out.
So we're talking about
preventive medicine,
toxicology, a blood test, maybe a questionnaire or short screening about their psychological history.
Yep.
And then baseline their mental cognition to compare for a TBI or a brain injury.
For sure.
Okay.
I mean, and you could dial it up as far as machines and testing symptoms. We can run like DTI, MRI to run a scan on their brain. We can send them through one of these more elaborate 6-hour tests that measure short and long-term memory.
Yeah, I've done it.
Okay. So I would say that would be the first one.
Okay.
The second is, okay, we have to train. You can't do this job without vigilant, hardcore, realistic training. But we also have to strike a balance here of how can we make the training realistic without adding the exposures. I still have not figured out a way to do that. I'm not a believer in computer games or virtual reality. I think that does not put the threat of how destructive these things are on the pressure while you're training, and you need that fear to make the training effective. So perhaps the interventions are going to have to be finding like some kind of like good fitting but lightweight KN95 mask that you can breathe through.
Okay.
We could also have better green ammunition that doesn't have lead primer. Maybe the third thing, and that, so again, we could go down a lot of avenues in that way, but I don't really, that's one of the reasons why we haven't jumped on that is I don't want to, the people who know best are the fucking NCOs who are doing the training. And I don't want to take anything out of their hands that they need to make sure that their troops are ready to go in full readiness.
So maybe just maybe the better answer is a different question. It's letting those that know are their experts in their field make the decisions once they're armed with the knowledge that a decision needs to be made.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that for sure.
Well, let's hold on to that.
Yeah.
So,
and maybe the third thing is the bases themselves have to have the healthiest food. We should not be serving our fucking Marines prison food. They should be getting non-GMO organic
like my
food.
prison food. Okay?
Fuck that. No, because poison food can often contribute to poisoned bodies. A lot of these toxicants that we don't get deep into are herbicides, pesticides that are on all of this different food.
So organic, non-GMOs.
Grown by veteran farmers. This would be a great program.
I'm all for it. Yeah.
And same with the water being, extra clean. And maybe we have fucking saunas. We know we can sweat some of these materials out.
Interesting.
God, I mean, I would love to put all the Marines through fucking yoga, but
hot yoga.
Yes.
Okay.
I've been doing that for 2.5 years. And again, it can't solve or cure anything. I mean, some of these yogis believe way too much of their own bullshit, but it does do a lot for the body, and sweating can be a source of removing some materials. But I think just having a healthier environment where we can have it would help reduce the body burden, make people feel better, and have healthier bodies. And healthier bodies are going to be able to withstand more PTSD, concussions, toxicants.
Resiliency.
Yes.
Physical and mental.
So
I like it.
That's this discussion that you're having is the one the Marine Corps needs to have if they get their teeth into the book. We'll see if they do.
Let's see if they do. Maybe I can help get it there, at least help get the message out. Yeah. A fascinating book. Again, I love the fact that it's written by the both of you. You're both complementary to one another's reading or writing styles. You support one another's positions with different angles. It's an incredible read. It's not just another narrative of a veteran that goes to war, because there's too many of those out there. This is uncomfortable to read because I think there's an uncomfortable truth behind it, and those are usually the most indelible. So thank you very much for sitting down and talking to me today. I've appreciated it.
Oh man, thank you. I appreciate it as well.
Awesome. Well, for Carry On Podcast, that is it for this edition. I am Brad Colbert, the Iceman. And as always, until next time, stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.